Hello, dear friends. I'd like to talk about Parashat Tazria-Metzora, which was just recently, this past Shabbat. It was a double parasha. And of course, the topic of Tazria-Metzora is the biblical leprosy. Now, biblical leprosy is quite different than what is known today. The leprosy of today is called Hansen's disease, which is a dermatological disease. There are ways of treating it. Whereas in biblical times, at least the description, and when I say biblical times, I mean specifically in the Pentateuch, in the Torah, in Leviticus and Vayikra, the way it's described in Tazria-Metzora is anything but Hansen's disease. For one thing, Metzora, or Tzarat, the biblical leprosy, can be either on one's skin, or one's clothing, or one's house, which of course the latter two have nothing to do with Hansen's disease. And it would be a wonder if it has to do with any disease, really, because usually diseases are diseases of the body. Of course, you could have mold on the house, but then the mold on the house will affect the body in the end and the respiratory system. Another thing then about this parsha that talks about various types of impurities. It talks about the menstrual impurity of a woman. It talks about a man having a nocturnal emission, or not necessarily nocturnal. It talks about even if it was done in marital copulation. It also talks about tzara, biblical leprosy, which is also a type of tum'ah, a type of impurity. In general, in the Bible, the prototype, or let's say the most severe impurity, is the impurity of a dead body. Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, in his Kuzari of the 11th century, says if you look, the biblical impurities are all connected to a loss of life. So a dead body, a human dead body, is of course the epitome of loss of life, and therefore is considered the most severe of the impurities. That's why even today, when we don't have what's called the ceremony of the red heifer, which the Bible in Bamidbar, in Numbers, describes as a way of getting purity from that, over the impurity of touching a dead body or coming in contact with a dead body or being in the same house, room with the dead body. So even though we cannot overcome that today because we don't have that ceremony, a Kohen, somebody who's descended from Aaron the priest, a Jewish Kohen cannot walk into a cemetery because he cannot add impurity to whatever he might already have. So, because that is, of course, the most severe of the impurities, and that is the custom till this day. And that's why a Kohen will only enter a cemetery for direct relatives who have passed away, because, of course, there's an obligation to both give it to honor and also to help the interment of a dead direct relative. Having said that, according to Rabbi Yehuda Levi, as I said, all the different types of impurities have to do with loss of life, whether a loss of complete life or a partial loss of life. So a woman's menstruation period is sort of like a loss of a potential life, which of course, an egg that wasn't fertilized. Also, if a man has an emission, it's a loss of a potential life, which of course did not make its way to an egg. And so, of course, leprosy, specifically the biblical leprosy, where it would eat away the flesh of a human, was also considered a partial loss of life. And this was the understanding of the meaning of impurity. Now, if according to Yudah Levi, impurity represents a loss of life or a partial loss of life or a loss of potential life, then we can understand that kedusha or sanctity means an embracement of life. And of course, King David says, Ki imcha makor chaim be'orchan yireor, for with you, God, is life, and with you we shall see light. And we also say, it says in the book of Nehemiah, Ki ata mechayeh et kulam, because you, meaning God, provide vitality and life for all. Ata mechayeh et kulam, utzva shamayim lechamishtahavim, and the hosts of heaven bow down to you. So with God there is life, and the life of Kedusha, a sanctified life, is a life that wants to enable life and keep us away from the things that destroy life, not just life proper, but the things that drag life into the pits, that drags our lives into meaningless. Or I would say, yes, a meaningless life. And so embracing Kedusha, embracing sanctity according to the Torah, by following the precepts of the Torah, is a way to embrace life fully according to the book of Vayikra, Leviticus, wherein it says in next week's parasha, Kedoshim to you, you shall be a holy people. And then it's a list of all the mitzvot, of all the commandments. Now, getting back to these double parashat of Tazria-Metzora, there's something very unusual. Well, first of all, what is Tazria-Metzora? Let's just think for a second about the idea of tzara'at, what it could mean. And why do I say that? Because where do we actually have cases of tzara'at in the Bible? Well, before this parsha, we have two cases. One of them is Moses. Before he goes to Egypt, God shows him signs. And of course, the first sign was taking water from the Nile, pouring it on land, and it turns to blood. No, the first sign was his mateh. The first sign was his mateh, which is his staff turning to a serpent. The second sign was putting his hand in his bosom and taking it out, and it was leprous. And the third sign was taking the water from the Nile onto dry land, and it turned to blood. These were signs he was supposed to show the elders of Israel, and also he showed Pharaoh. Now, why is there leprosy? Of course, their leprosy doesn't seem to be a punishment. However, the Midrash, and Rashi brings this, since Moses said, V'hem lo yaminu li, that the Jewish people won't believe me, God told him, yeah, therefore you'll do the second sign, which is leprosy, because you're motzi lashon hara. You're saying evil things against the Jewish people. Rabbis also connected the biblical leprosy with gossiping, meaning bad-mouthing somebody, character assassination of another person, things that tear down life in a social sense and pull somebody away from society. But that was case number one, which is mentioned in the Bible, the book of Exodus. Case number two, of course, is Miriam. Miriam and Aaron are talking about Moses, and they're saying certain things about Moses, which God considers unacceptable, and all of a sudden Miriam becomes leprous. And Aaron says to Moses to pray for Miriam, which he does. El narafan Allah, God, please heal her. And then Miriam has to be outside of the camp for 7 days. Those are the cases that we know of. But the cases written in this parsha, the Tazria-Metzora, did they actually come to fruition? We know that the case with the leprosy on the land in the house had to be in the land of Israel, so not in the desert. But the first two, I guess, could have happened even in the desert. Did these cases actually happen? Maybe in the desert they did, even though they're not recorded. But in the land of Israel, it's not clear. And the interesting thing is, our rabbis who decided which haftarah we have to read, which each one of these parshiot, meaning what quotes from the books of prophets we're supposed to read, both of them are from the book of Kings. In this week's Parashat Tazria, we read about the leprosy of Naaman, who was the chief of staff of the army of Aram, a nation bordering the northern part of Israel, which was also the northern kingdom at the time of Israel. And the second one, of course, is the Haftorah talking about the four lepers who were outside the gates of Shomron, of Samaria. In both cases, it appears that it is Hansen's disease and not the biblical leprosy, meaning it's some type of dermatological disease, especially with Naaman, who is, of course, a non-Jew, and also it is banished not by the Kohen, as it says in this week's Parsha, but by the prophet Elisha, who tells him to dip in the Jordan 7 times, which of course has no connection to what the Bible says in this week's Parsha about Sarat, about biblical leprosy. So in both cases, in the book of Kings, it appears that biblical leprosy did not exist anymore. So therefore, the question is, was biblical leprosy one of those things where we say, Drosh v'kabel sachar, meaning learn it, try to figure out what it means, receive a reward, but it probably never happened in the land of Israel because there are no cases recorded in the Bible, at least, from the book of the prophets, from Joshua and on, of this happening in the land of Israel? Or did it happen, but we just don't know about it? Of course, there's the same argument about the case of Ben Sorer Moreh in Deuteronomy, the rebellious child. Was this something that actually happened, yes or no? And one could ask the same question about leprosy. The question is, though, if it didn't happen, what is the meaning of this leprosy for the Torah? Or even if it did happen, what is the meaning? And if leprosy is this engagement with negativity, with things that bring decline on life, things that bring decadence into life, how is this to be understood? I'd like to give a partial explanation. In Kabbalistic understandings, the human being is a body, and within the body there is a soul. And the soul has levels. The primary levels are called nefesh, ruach, and neshama. Nefesh being the lower level of the body. It's really the part of the soul, the lower level of the soul. It's a part of the soul which fills the body. It's the vitality of life within the body. In fact, nefesh in the Bible actually seems to be the living body. B'shivim nefesh yardu avotecha mitzrayma. 60 living bodies came down to Egypt. And of course, the prohibition of eating blood is because the blood is the life force. Ki adam hu nefesh, because the blood is the nefesh, the life force. Therefore, you can't eat it with the meat. This is what it says in Deuteronomy and Devarim. So, nefesh, therefore, is the lower level of the soul, which is the part of the soul that we are aware of, the life force within us that gives us this consciousness and free will. The second level is called ruach, literally spirit, which is preconscious. It's just above us, meaning it's just, of course, all the levels of the soul are inner levels, but it's just above or below, if you want to call it. It's the same idea because these are not spatial concepts. So you might say, if you want to say, you could say it's just below consciousness, it's sort of pre-conscious. And this is ruach, which can only be touched and let's say interfaced on rare occasions. And then the most inner is called the neshama, which is like the divine spark, according to Zoharic text. and Hasidic text within us, which we actually don't come in touch with during this lifetime, but it is the core of our being. Then higher than that, according to the Arizal, you have also, aside from Nefesh, Ruach, and Neshama, Chaya and Yechida, which are called Mekifin, which means they're so far away from this vessel, which is called the Guf, which is called the body, that they are abounding in every way because they have no connection to the body anymore. The Ruach has a slight connection, the Neshama doesn't, but beyond the Neshama, it's like boundless. So it's called Mekifin. It sort of encompasses you, and it does not directly relate to the imagery of your body anymore. If this is the way it is in Kedusha and holiness, so when we interface with the world, we're interfacing with moving away from holiness, or the possibility of moving away from holiness, which is the possibility of moving away from life. And in the writings of the Ari, these are also mekifim, things that encompass us in the natural world. So in the natural world, what encompasses our body is our skin, which is the first thing. Therefore, the body is never seen under the skin. It's just the skin that is seen, the outer shell. And then we have the clothing that we use to cover our body to protect it. And then we have the house that we live in that we use to cover ourselves to protect us also from the heat and the cold, unless we have to go out and we have to use other clothing to give us a double protection over our regular clothing when it's either very hot or when it's either very cold or very sunny when we go outside. So you might say that there's a sort of a parallel. You can see the human consciousness then as oscillating between two parallel lines, which is the inner lines, which is the nefesh, ruach, neshama, chaya, yichida, which is within our, if you want, our subconscious, whether it's up or down, your choice. So, in psychology, they always call it subconscious or down. In Hasidic texts, sometimes they call it up, as they do in early texts, let's say, of the Hechalat literature. And therefore, we are sort of like between two cones, if you want to look at it that way. The inner cone, the subconscious cone, nefesh, ruach, neshama, chaya, chida. And then there's the outer cone, which is the world around us, the mekifin, which encompass us in this world, which is, of course, the skin, clothing, and the house. Leprosy is a decadence within the outer clothing, within the skin, the clothing, and the house, which is the way that we interface with this world. And this, of course, is an example, because if you would ask me, what about the chaya yechida, which is called mekifin? But just like the chaya and yechida in the subconscious world, we can't come in contact with it because it's very distant. Same thing in this world. There are distant things that we can only partially influence, but not directly. And that would be, aside from our house, our community, and our country. That would be like chaya yechida, if you understand the mashal, the parable, the analogy, which I'm creating here. So the human being is living between these two cones. The inner one, nefesh, ruach, neshama, chaya, chida. The outer one, paralleling nefesh, ruach, neshama, which is the skin, the clothing, and the house. And then, of course, the community and the country, or if you want, the whole world, which is an extension of the country. So in each time, there are some times when we have to be more inner, and many times we have to be outer because we live in this world. But the outer has to be influenced by the inner. When the outer and the inner are congruent in harmony, then the outer is kadosh, is also sanctified by the inner. When the outer becomes decadent and influenced by the negative forces, which exist and exert themselves in this world, then there has to be a repair. There has to be a tahara, a purity, a purification of the outside, which you start, which is a way of understanding or giving a perspective of what we're talking about. We have purity, impurity on one side, and purity on the spiritual realm on the other side. And the human being is caught between these two forces in their lives. One last thing I'd like to say is I'd like to say a few words about the Haftarah of the Parashat Tazria, which also gives a certain idea about the ideas of Tahara, of purity. And this is taken from the book of Kings. It starts off at the end of chapter 4, which I'll skip at the moment, and continues into chapter 5. Now, the story, as I mentioned before, one moment. The story, as I mentioned before, the story of Naaman, the commander of the army of the king of Aram, as you can see here in 2 Kings 5. Commander of the army, he was the chief of staff. Now remember, Aram and the northern kingdom of Israel were at odds. They used to fight wars every periodically. And and Elisha is living in the northern kingdom and is a prophet for the one God in the northern kingdom. Naaman was an important man to his Lord, meaning his king, high in favor. For through him, God had granted victory to Aram. But the man who was a great warrior, was also a leper. When the Arameans were out raiding, they carried off a young girl from the land of Israel, and she became an attendant to Naaman's wife. Again, had fought battles against the kingdom of Israel, and here we have a story of a young girl who was taken captive, and she became a servant to Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, I guess to find favor, Jewish master would come before that prophet in Samaria, in the Shomron, because this prophet, namely Elisha, could cure him of his leprosy. Elisha, who was a student and the apprentice of Elijah, who took his place, of course. So Naaman went and told his king what the girl of the land of Israel said. And the king of Aram said, okay, go to the king of Israel. I'll send along a letter, in Hebrew, sefer, which also means a book. He set out, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 changes of clothing, 10 suits. He brought the letter to the king of Israel. It read, now, when this letter reaches you, and this king of Israel would be probably Joram, the son of Achav. By the way, Achav, the father, had been killed in a battle with Aram. Now I've sent my courtier Naaman to you that you may cure him of leprosy. So the king of Aram is writing to the king of Israel saying, I want you to cure this man from leprosy. Now, when the king of Israel read the letter, he rent his clothes and cried, am I God to deal death or to give life? That this fellow writes to me to cure a man of leprosy? See for yourselves, he's seeking a pretext against me to come to battle. But then Elisha, the prophet, the agent of God, heard that the king of Israel had rent his clothes. He sent a message, why have you rent your clothes? Let him come to me, and he will learn that there is a prophet in Israel. Or, to rephrase, I would say that Elisha wants the king of Israel, Joram, to understand that he is the prophet in Israel, and not the fake prophets that he got from his father Achav, the prophets of the Baal, who were his yes men. So Naaman came with his horses and chariots and halted at the door of Elisha's house. Elisha the prophet sent a messenger to him, saying, go and bathe 7 times in the Jordan, and your flesh shall be restored. You shall be pure again. Now, Naaman made the trek, came with his entourage, actually wanted to go down to meet Elisha. That was the goal. So for him, this was a good thing. But now he's taken aback. What's going on? I am the chief of the staff, the army, an army which has beaten you guys in battles a few times. You could at least come say hello. to show your face. Why didn't Elisha come down to show his face? The Midrash says that the reason was that earlier in the book of Kings, in that battle between Aram, the Arameans, and the northern kingdom of Israel, that battle where Achav was killed by a stray arrow, and it doesn't say by whom. The Midrash says that arrow was shot by Naaman, the chief of staff of the Aramean army. And just like Elisha knew that his teacher, Eliyahu, despite all his differences with Achav, who was a wicked king, had a respect for him because he loved his people, meaning Achav loved his people. So Elisha didn't want really to meet with Naaman. This whole plan was basically that the king of Israel gain respect for the prophet. So Naaman was angered. Elisha didn't come see him, walked away. I thought he said the prophet would come to me, would stand, invoke the eternal God by name, would wave his hand towards the spot and cure the affected part of the leprosy. Aren't the rivers of Amanan Parpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? I could bathe in them and be pure. He walked off in rage. But his servants came forward and spoke to him. Sir, he said, if the prophet told you to do something difficult, wouldn't you not do it? Now that he told you to do something easy, bathe and be pure, just do it. So he went down, immersed himself in the Jordan 7 times as the agent of God had bidden the prophet, and his flesh became like a little child, and he was pure again. Now this is interesting. What is the difference between Naaman's thinking of purity and the prophet? For Naaman, you go to the holy man does everything, calls out to God, he waves his hand, he says some incantation, and hocus pocus is gone. I'm not supposed to do anything. What am I supposed to do? I can't do anything. It reminds me of people sometimes go to the doctor. I'm sick. The doctor has to make me better. Give me a pill, make me feel better. What, you want me to change my diet? You want me to work out? You want me to do things? That's ridiculous, right? So unfortunately, some people see the doctor the same way. But here you can really see that the way they see the holy man or the shaman, it's you do it, not me. Elisha tells him it doesn't work that way. You've got to do it. You've got to go to the Jordan. You've got to bathe. And yes, I'll pray for you, but you got to do it. So then Naaman comes back and he returns with his entourage to the agent of God, meaning the prophet. He stood before him and exclaimed, now I know that there is no God in the whole world except in Israel. Okay, he saw the light. There's only one God, the God of Israel. So please accept a gift from your servant. Because in his thinking, this is very important. The holy man does something, you have to give them something. Elisha replied, as God lives who I serve, I will not accept anything. I don't want anything from you. Because the truth is, he didn't do it for him. He did it to impress the king of Israel. And Naaman pressed him to accept, but he refused. And Naaman then said, well, at least let your servant be given 2 mule loads of earth, for your servant will never again offer a burnt offering or a sacrifice to any god except the God. What does that mean? Naaman wants to take earth from the land of Israel when he goes back to Aram, which is the area of Syria, probably around southern Syria at that time, and because he wants to give an offering to God on earth that was taken from the land of the God of Israel. So that's what he wants to do, because I guess that's what they did in antiquity. And especially for the house of a holy man. Then he continues, may God pardon your servant for this. When my master, meaning the king of Aram, enters the temple of Rimmon, which is pagan deity, to bow down and worship, he leans on my arm So I have to bow down to the temple of Rimmon as well, to this pagan deity. May God pardon your servant for this. So he's basically asking in advance for the prophet to pardon him because, there are official ceremonies in the kingdom where I'm with the king that he has to bow down to the pagan worship, and I have to bow with him. Elisha, who really doesn't like this conversation, besides Judaism doesn't believe in indulgences that you have to take responsibility for what you do. He ends off by saying, "One piece." That's it. So there's more to the story, but that's where the Haftorah stops. So what we see here, number one, is, as I said, it seems to be more like Hansen's disease than the leprosy of the Bible. Secondly, this interesting idea that purity is something you have to have a part in, you have to work at it. It doesn't just, even if there are things you can do, it's not just that. Because purity is all through the human being. It's not just the purity of the body, it's also the purity of the mind and the spirit and the emotions and the way we treat others. It's all these things have to be rectified and have to be done. And as I said, you have to be involved in it. Somebody could give you the advice. Somebody could tell you what to do. Someone could even help pray on your behalf. But you have to be involved in it. And just like society, it can't only come from the top. Society has to be involved if it wants to see itself go on the path of holiness and purity. It has to be not only educated that way, but also walk in that path and believe in it. Shalom, shalom.